Malice or incompetence, that's usually the dichotomy we're presented with when trying to understand how and why the left operates as it does. But maybe we're just overcomplicating things because the left can easily be both. For example, Michael Cohen's former lawyer is running into some embarrassing headwinds, let's say, for submitting fake AI-generated cases to a Manhattan judge. Though he won't be facing punishment for it, perhaps a bruised ego is punishment enough. The judge, Jesse Furman, wrote in response, quote, "His citation to non-existent cases is embarrassing and certainly negligent, perhaps even grossly negligent, but the court cannot find that it was done in bad faith," end quote. I guess that's what David Schwartz gets for listening to Cohen in the first place. Michael Cohen, President Trump's former lawyer turned backstabber, admitted that he's the one who gave the fake cases to Schwartz from Google's artificial intelligence system Bard, but he maintains it was a mistake. Now, I don't really know how that's possible, but okay. The Daily Caller explains today, quote, "Schwartz is no longer representing Cohen. However, the mistake was discovered while trying to end Cohen's supervised release. He was on supervised release because of his 2018 conviction for tax evasion and breaking campaign finance laws." Rejecting Cohen's request for early release, Furman pointed out the inconsistencies in his statements and suggested he might have lied, the New York Post reported, end quote. Well, now that we've covered the incompetence side of things, and quite clearly, let's move ahead to the malice portion. And who better to use as an example than the vindictive Attorney General of New York? Taking a break from gloating over the accumulating interest on Judge Engoron's disastrous decision against President Trump, Letitia James argued today that the court should reject any request by President Trump to move forward with his appeal without having to post the entire $464 million bond first. If James gets her way and President Trump is unable to come up with the money by Monday's deadline, James may be able to start seizing his properties and other assets. The Trump campaign is putting out a new fundraising plea to supporters called "Keep Your Filthy Hands Off of Trump Tower." The goal is to get 1 million supporters to aid in this effort. Joining us now to discuss all this and more is military defense attorney Davis Younts. Davis, thanks for being here tonight.
Good evening.
So do you think the court should be granting President Trump's request for him to move forward with this appeal without him having to put up the whole sum of money right now?
I mean, absolutely. What is being done is he's subjected to an unprecedented use of a statute that's been in existence for 70 years. It's never been used like this before. So it's an unprecedented use of this statute. So there are significant legal issues in this case. There's every reason to believe he will have a high level of success on this appeal. But what is being done is an attempt to make it impossible for him to come up with this money unless he sells off significant assets that even if he wins the appeal, those properties are sold and gone. So he's being put into an absolutely unjust and impossible situation. It even appears to be a violation of the 8th Amendment, some sort of cruel and unusual punishment, what they're doing to him. And just before we came onto the air, the Attorney General went ahead and filed a judgment against the Westchester Golf Course in New York and his private property in Seven Pines. So now she's filed judgments against his properties in New York, Trump Tower, as well as his other properties throughout New York State. So it's absolutely absurd to make someone appeal, come up with all of this money, essentially suffer all of the consequences of a court decision before they can even appeal it, and irreparable harm will be done to him, his family, and his businesses if he has to go through with this.
It's just like you were saying, that they just love making the process, the punishment, and just wringing him with so much pain. And that's what makes me so upset, because Letitia James, this whole time, she's been gloating on Twitter or X, right, that, oh, the interest is now this much money. Now it's this much money. I mean, she's been just so excited, absolutely salivating over all of this. And I mean, we could go through the merits of the case or the lack thereof, right? We've talked about it ad nauseum that, the banks wanted President Trump actually to be their client. They went out of their way to get him because they knew that he'd bring in money. None of them ever claimed that they lost money. He paid back all of his loans with interest on time. So we could go through all of that. But I kind of want to harp on the point of how just vindictive all of this feels, because then also she had her, and I have this quote here, her senior assistant solicitor general, Dennis Fan, and basically he wrote to the court saying, well, the defendants are really just worried about a fire sale. Kind of going back to what you're saying, is that this vindictive glee over, Trump, just sell everything. Oh, come on, you're not going to sell everything? Do it. Oh, that's all you're worried about? It's like this weird, like they're all surrounding like hyenas, like vultures trying to pick at the corpse. And I guess that's really what bothers me. But I guess maybe even more interesting though, as we're talking about selling off assets and ooh, maybe he can sell Mar-a-Lago and he can sell this, and the left is just so gleeful about it. I want to show you a quick clip from CNN because they had some, maybe it's a real estate expert, I don't know, talking about how much Mar-a-Lago is worth. And so those who followed the case and what Judge Engeron said about Mar-a-Lago might be scratching their heads at this admission from CNN. But let's watch that clip.
The property that you alluded to, Mar-a-Lago, potentially that could be something that could be sold quickly. I think the valuation is something in the hundreds of millions, and I think there could be a buyer for something like that.
And that would be literally, if you're talking about doing that between now and Monday, that's picking up the phone, calling someone, and then literally writing a check.
Yeah, I mean, there could be plenty of international people who want to buy that property. I mean, there's properties that are priced at 150 and 200 million that are nearby that. And Palm Beach is like the NVIDIA, of real estate. It's just shot up like a rocket. And people do want to live there. They've moved there. So I think that would be the best case scenario as to property. If he's trying to sell quickly, I would encourage that.
So, all right, now that's 240 million estimated. I mean, who knows? You know, he's a desperate seller. In this case, someone picks up the phone and makes that call this week. So I don't know what it'd be. That's still half of what it would be.
Engeron told us that was only worth 18 million. What's going on?
No, you're absolutely right. It's just so absurd, right? The valuation in this court case was that it was, 17.9 million was the value. And now they're saying, oh, you can sell it for this amount. But again, how fast does it take for a complex commercial real estate transaction to go through? That's absurd. But, so many people have had a hard time describing what's happening to this. But this is like a homeowner. This whole thing is the equivalent of a homeowner going out and getting a home equity loan after they had an appraiser tell them, your home is worth $600,000. They go to the bank, they get a home equity loan for $100,000. The bank underwrites it. They look at it, no issues. They agree with the evaluation. And what has happened is they say, okay, that homeowner pays back the loan. They've sold the house. And 10 years later, this is the equivalent of 10 years later, the state of New York coming back, finding some real estate expert to say, when you took out that home equity loan, your home was actually only worth $550,000 in our opinion. So you overvalued it $50,000. So we're going to impose a huge fine on you, and we're going to go 10 years worth of interest on that. So now you're going to go bankrupt, even though you sold that home, you paid back the loan, the bank doesn't care, no fraud was committed. You're absolutely right about all those things, but that's what this is the equivalent of. And of course they can find a politically motivated real estate expert to testify in a New York court that Mar-a-Lago was worth $17.9 million when he got a loan for it. It's just, the whole thing is absurd.
It is, and of course the political nature of all this, and they pretend that they're trying to crack down on, oh, President Trump's fraud. Of course, we've thoroughly debunked all that, but I mean, these are the same people who let in 2008, all the people who basically screwed us over, they all got away with it. I don't remember anyone going to prison for that. Same thing with COVID and the great transfer of wealth away from us, middle and working class Americans and up to big pharma and all the rest and all their buddies. I don't remember anyone going to prison for that either. And you see that there's still billions of dollars of COVID fraud that's out there in the hands and pockets of all sorts of entities, and the Treasury Department and the rest are like, well, not a whole lot we can do about it, and we'll just have to kind of write it off. And yet we're here and we're supposed to pretend that they really take fraud so seriously, that they're going to make up a whole fraud case against President Trump while letting actual fraudsters who've actually defrauded all of us Americans, and we're feeling it each and every day through inflation and through other means. It's absolutely sickening, right? But that is where we are. And so I think we've covered the Malice section. I do want to talk a little bit about the incompetence, though. I don't know if you heard the Michael Cohen story and his former lawyer before we went on air here tonight, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, giving fake AI cases to make your case to a judge in Manhattan. They claim it's all an accident. It's a little hard for me to believe, but what's your take on this?
This is not the only time this has happened with a lawyer turning in a brief or some other court paperwork with fake cases using AI. And the problem is there's not really an excuse for it. No attorney should ever be turning in any case without reading the cases they're citing themselves and actually going through it. And when you're an attorney, you're supposed to be an officer of the court. You're telling the judge, when you turn in that document and you cite those cases, you can trust the work that I'm providing for you. I have verified this. I've read this. This is what the case proposition stands for. So it's just a question of professionalism and competence, and there's really no excuse for that kind of a mistake. And it doesn't matter if AI is new or anything else. No one should be having Google write their legal briefs.
Especially when we've seen the kind of images and paragraphs and everything else that have come out of these AI little machines, these little software programs, whatever. It's insane what's coming out. And so to feed that back into the court, but I don't know, we are in that upside down clown world. So maybe it could pass muster at this point. But there's another big legal story that I want to get to you tonight, and that has to do with ABC's Greg Stephanopoulos. I remember it was not too long ago he had the Congresswoman Nancy Mace on, and he got in big trouble actually because he was bringing up her past as a rape victim to try and shame her, to say how can you still support President Trump. Now, I'm not the biggest Nancy Mace fan, but of course his line of questioning was a little much. But however, as he was pressing her, I think it's about 10 times they were saying that he was saying that President Trump was found liable of rape in the E. Jean Carroll case, but of course that's the exact opposite of what was found. And so now President Trump and his lawyers are now going to be suing Stephanopoulos for defamation. So if you've been following this case, what should we know about it? Because I think this looks pretty bad for Stephanopoulos.
Yeah, the first thing you should know is there's a huge difference between sexual abuse, which was the finding in that case, and rape. There's no excuse. There is no doubt that George Stephanopoulos, with all the resources they have, the producers on their show, the research assistants they have on their show, they made a choice to use the word rape because it's emotionally charged. They thought it would get clicks. They thought it would get views, but they knew that was not the case. So there's no excuse for this. So if they can show malice, and I think they can, just based on George Stephanopoulos' the entire interview, his demeanor, his actions towards Trump in the past, the things that he said, they can show malice. This is a very, very strong case. The other piece about this story that just bothers me is, I'm a father. I have 2 daughters. I'm a husband. I don't understand how we've reached a point in our society where it is okay for a grown man to treat a woman this way about something so sensitive, so private, and just so emotional for her. I mean, how is that okay? Let alone a sitting Congresswoman, but how is that okay? Why have we stooped to that level? Is George Stephanopoulos so desperate for views, for relevance, for viewership that he would do that? I don't understand it, because it's the kind of thing that used to get people challenged to a duel or punched in the face, quite frankly.
Maybe we should go back to those days, right? And then maybe it'd bring back a lot more decorum, I think, in our politics today and in our society at large. Now, the last legal headline I wanted to get to you with tonight, as part of our wrap up, it comes from California. There's a city in between San Diego and LA, and their police department now is following a new law that's come into effect where there's a lot of constraints placed upon when you can and can't show pictures of suspects or those who've been arrested. They can only be up for a certain amount of time. Certain faces can't be shown. So now the police department, as you can see right there, and excuse me for already laughing, but it's just too funny. Their whole Instagram and social media presence is now full of pictures of those who they're arresting, but of course it's full of Lego heads to keep their identities anonymous. So as an attorney, what do you think of when you see this? Or is it just a good chuckle all the way around?
I really do think it is a good chuckle. There are other police departments in the state of California and other places that have done things like this. They put up similar posts that do sort of endear them to the community. As a criminal defense attorney, you don't want to see anyone, publicly humiliated when they haven't been convicted yet. The problem is, in a state like California, when they continually release criminals, they put criminals with zero bond back out on the streets, it does create a danger. So there is some value to publicly posting pictures of individuals, mugshots of individuals that are suspected of crimes, especially if they're going to release them on the street. So that's the downside of this, because there is a risk to the public by doing this. But overall, I think in some ways it just shows kind of the absurdity of the law, but it's also a police department with a sense of humor. And at least they're taking, the compliance with the law and giving us something to chuckle about.
And you're right, of course, because it seems like every time there's a new policy or anything implemented, it always seems to skew in favor of criminals or suspected criminals, right? It never seems to skew in favor of protecting the public or citizens. But, you are right. There is that nugget of truth that there are people who do get arrested and they're actually innocent. And so they don't want their names and faces spread everywhere, and then they'll have to deal with that fallout for who knows, the rest of their life. I do know it's actually funny in the UK, though, with all their crazy laws protecting criminals these days, that when they do post mugshots, that sometimes people will write online comments just kind of poking fun at how the person looks. And then a lot of these police departments in the UK will then go after those commenters on hate speech grounds, especially if they're poking fun at the person for being, say, transgender or, whatever else. But, it's an insane world, like I said, that we're living in. Davis, thanks for going through these headlines with us tonight.
Thank you. Take care.
And coming up next...